She dressed in the dark, and the sound she made was almost nothing. The soft pull of a button through its loop, the whisper of wool against the floorboards as she lifted her travel bag from the chair beside the window. Dorothea Pembridge had been awake since 3 in the morning, not from sleeplessness, but from decision. And the decision had been so complete by the time the clock on the mantel struck 4 that she was dressed and standing before the mirror before she thought to light a candle. She did not light one. The gray before dawn was enough for what she needed to do, and she had always preferred to see clearly without the distraction of flattering light. The room at Dunmore Hall was handsome. She could acknowledge that. The ceiling high, the furnishings chosen with the quiet authority of old money rather than new display, and the fire in the grate burned down to orange coals that gave the room a warmth she had not expected when she arrived 3 nights ago. She had not expected a number of things about Dunmore Hall or about its master. That was precisely the difficulty. She crossed to the dresser. The garnet necklace lay where she had placed it the night before, against the white linen of the jewelry cloth. The stones dark as dried blood in the low light, the gold of the setting worn smooth at the clasp from years of use. Crispin Ashcroft had placed it around her neck at dinner 3 nights ago, his fingers working the clasp with a careful attention that she had noticed and tried not to notice. His hands had stilled for a moment against the back of her neck, not improperly, nothing so legible as that. But the warmth of them had reached her before he stepped away, and she had carried the warmth with her through the soup course and the fish course, and the long, careful conversation about the estate management practices of the western counties. And she had still been carrying it when she climbed the stairs to bed. She had told herself it was nothing. She had been telling herself that for a week. She unclasped the necklace now, feeling the small, precise mechanism give under her thumb, and she carried it to the bed. To his pillow, the one on the left, the one that had not been touched. Because Dunmore Hall was a house in which appearances were maintained with the thoroughness of long practice. She set the necklace down, not dropped, not placed carelessly, not flung with the drama of injury. She set it with the same precision she brought to a column of accounts. Each garnet aligned with the fold of the pillowcase, the clasp at the top so that it could be lifted and worn again without any searching. It was the last thing she could do for him with any grace, and so she did it carefully. She picked up the travel bag. She walked to the door. She opened it. Crispin Ashcroft was standing in the corridor. He wore his dressing gown, dark blue wool, and he was not holding a candle either. He had clearly been there for some time. His arms were at his sides, his posture the still, deliberate uprightness of a man who had decided on his position and intended to hold it. His hair was not disordered. His face, in the thin gray light from the window at the corridor's end, was entirely composed. He looked at her. She looked at him. He looked at the travel bag in her hand, and then back at her face. And something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, because he had clearly known she would come through that door, but something that had no immediate name and that she did not spend time trying to find. She did not speak. He did not speak. She walked past him. Her shoulder came within inches of his arm as she passed, and she felt the warmth of him the way she had felt it at the dinner table, a fact she registered and filed and did not allow to alter her pace. The corridor was long. The stairs were at its end. She descended them with her hand on the banister and her back straight and her feet finding each step with the steadiness of a woman who had made her decision before dawn and would not unmake it in the dark. The front door of Dunmore Hall was unlocked. She had thought it might not be, and she had thought about what she would do if it was not. And she had concluded that she would find another way out, because there was always another way out of a house if you were not afraid of inconvenience. But the door was unlocked, and it opened onto the cold air of a November morning. And the carriage she had arranged the previous afternoon, through the housekeeper quietly, framed as an early departure for family reasons, was waiting on the drive, the horse's breath rising in the dark. She climbed in. The carriage moved. She did not look back at the house. She looked forward, through the small window, at the lane that led to the road that led to Halesworth. And she kept her hands folded in her lap, with a steadiness that cost her something she would not have named, even alone. Behind her, inside Dunmore Hall, a man was standing in a corridor in his dressing gown, and he was not calling after her. She could not hear him, of course. The distance was already too great, and the carriage wheels too loud on the frozen gravel. But she knew he was not calling. She knew it with the certainty of a woman who understands, without requiring proof, when a silence is a choice rather than an absence. That silence, chosen, deliberate, the silence of a man who let her go, was what she carried with her the length of the journey home. She carried it more carefully than she had carried the necklace. 3 nights earlier, the dining room at Dunmore Hall had been lit with the particular abundance of candles that a house produces when it is trying to make an impression it does not quite trust itself to make otherwise. Dorothea had noticed this on her arrival. The extra branches on the table, the fire built higher than the room required. And she had filed it alongside the other things she was noticing about Crispin Ashcroft. The way he poured her wine himself rather than directing the footman. The way he asked her opinion of the Eastern counties' enclosure practices, and then listened to the answer with an attention she was not accustomed to receiving from men who had asked her a question. She had come to Dunmore Hall with clear expectations. She was 38 years old, the daughter of a viscount whose estate had been entailed away from her at his death. And she had been educated in the management of land and accounts and legal succession in the way that a father who has no sons and does not believe in wasting a capable mind will educate a daughter. She had been on the marriage market, in the loosest possible sense, since she was 22, and she had watched herself move through it with the steady diminishment of a woman who is too much of several things the market does not require. Too educated, too particular, too old, as the years accumulated. She had agreed to the arrangement with Lord Ashcroft because she was 38, and she wanted a house of her own and a life that was not borrowed from the charity of cousins. And she had told herself, firmly, that wanting anything more than that was the kind of sentimentality that led sensible women into misery. And then Crispin Ashcroft had placed his mother's necklace around her neck at dinner, and his fingers had stilled against the back of her neck for 3 seconds, and she had felt, with a clarity that alarmed her, that she had been wrong to lower her expectations quite so completely. The necklace was his mother's. He had said so briefly, without ceremony, before he clasped it. He had not made a speech about it. He had simply said, "This was my mother's. I would like you to wear it this evening, if you are willing." And she had been willing, and he had put it on, and the warmth of his hands had reached her. And she had spent the rest of the dinner telling herself it meant nothing beyond the ordinary courtesy of a man arranging a marriage. After dinner, the other guests, his cousin and the cousin's wife, who had been present as a form of chaperone and had fulfilled that function with the minimum possible interference, withdrew early. Dorothea found herself alone with Crispin in the drawing room. Standing near the fire with a glass of wine she was not particularly drinking, looking at the portrait above the mantel of a woman with dark eyes and a composed expression that Dorothea recognized, in some register she could not quite name, as familiar. "Your mother?" she asked. "Yes," Crispin said. He was standing 6 feet from her, near the window, in the posture she was beginning to recognize as his natural one. Still, contained, his weight settled as though he had decided to be exactly where he was, and did not intend to be moved. She died when I was 11. The portrait was done the year before. She looks, Dorothea said, like a woman who is accustomed to making the best of things. He looked at the portrait for a moment. Yes, he said again, she was. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Dorothea turned her wine glass slowly in her hands and looked at the fire, and thought that this was, against all her careful management of her own expectations, going rather better than she had prepared for. She thought that she might, in a house like this, with a man who listened when she spoke, find something that resembled a life rather than merely an arrangement. Then Crispin said, "I owe you a candor that I have been postponing." She turned to look at him. His expression had not changed, but something in the quality of his stillness had altered. It was no longer the stillness of a man at ease, but the stillness of a man holding something in place by force of will. "There is a problem," he said, "with the arrangement, with you specifically." Dorothea waited. "You are not what I ordered," Crispin said. He said it plainly. He said it in the same tone he had used to discuss the Eastern Counties' enclosure practices, direct, unhurried, precise. He said it looking at her, not away from her. He said it as though it were a statement of fact rather than a cruelty. And perhaps he believed it was. And perhaps that was the most clarifying thing about the entire evening. Dorothea did not ask what he meant. She understood what he meant, or she understood enough of it. And she had spent 38 years developing the particular discipline of not asking questions, whose answers would be used against her later. She set her wine glass down on the table beside the sofa, with a care that was the twin of the care she would use 3 nights later with a necklace. She straightened. She looked at him with the expression that her father had once called her account book face. Not cold, not warm, simply inaccurate. "Good night, Lord Ashcroft," she said. She went upstairs. She did not hurry. She washed her face and unpinned her hair, and sat at the small desk in the corner of the room and wrote 3 letters, to her solicitor, to her cousin in Halesworth, who had agreed to have the house ready, and to the carrier who would need to collect her trunk from the station. By the time the house was fully dark and the last footstep in the corridor had ceased, the letters were sealed and the decision was complete, and she had not cried. Because she had learned a long time ago that crying in someone else's house was a luxury she could not afford. She took off the necklace and set it on the jewelry cloth and looked at it for a moment in the candlelight. The garnets were very beautiful. She had, for approximately 4 hours, almost believed they were hers. The building she leased in Halesworth had been a solicitor's office before the solicitor retired to Bath, and it had the slightly formal, slightly dusty quality of a room that has spent years taking things seriously. Dorothea liked it immediately. She had the floors swept and the windows cleaned and 2 pianos moved in. One upright for the teaching room, one better instrument for the larger space at the back that would serve as a recital room when the time came. And within 6 weeks, she had 4 pupils. Within 3 months, she had 14. The county noticed. The county had noticed from the beginning, of course, because the county notices everything and processes it through the particular machinery of collective sympathy that is, upon inspection, a form of sustained condescension. The general view was that Lady Pembridge had found a purpose, which was commendable given her disappointment, and that the conservatory was a very creditable enterprise for a woman in her position. This view was circulated in drawing rooms with the warm, pitying tone of people who believe they are being kind and have not examined the belief closely enough to discover that they are not. Dorothea taught through it. She taught scales and sight reading and the correct hand position for a trill, and she corrected without impatience and praised without condescension, and found, to her own moderate surprise, that she was good at it. Not merely competent, but genuinely, specifically good, in the way that a person is good at a thing when the thing requires the particular combination of qualities they actually possess. Mrs. Cavendish came to her in the third week, ostensibly to inquire about a lesson for her niece, and actually to take the measure of Dorothea's situation with the direct intelligence of a woman who has been widowed young and has spent 15 years developing her own view of things without reference to anyone else's. She had a niece, it turned out, who was genuinely interested in the pianoforte, and she herself had a practical intelligence and no patience whatsoever for social cruelty, and within a fortnight she had become Dorothea's most useful ally, and more carefully, her only confidant. "They are being kind about you," Mrs. Cavendish said one afternoon, sitting in the chair beside the recital room fire with a directness that Dorothea found, each time, like a window opened in a closed room. "Lady Hesterfield in particular. She mentions you in every drawing room she enters." "I know," Dorothea said. She was sorting through a stack of music sheets on the table, not looking up. "She mentioned me to Mrs. Ford last Tuesday, and Mrs. Ford mentioned it to the apothecary's wife, and the apothecary's wife mentioned it to me by accident on Thursday, while asking about her daughter's lesson time." "Does it trouble you?" Mrs. Cavendish asked. Dorothea set down the music sheets. "It troubles me in the way that rain troubles me when I have forgotten my coat," she said. "It is unpleasant, and I did not choose it. But it does not change where I am going." Mrs. Cavendish looked at her with an expression that was close to satisfaction. "Good," she said simply. At Dunmore Hall, meanwhile, the east wing was being emptied. The county observed this too, the furniture vans on the drive, the auction notices in the county paper, the methodical liquidation of the contents of a wing that had been closed since the old Earl's death. The county discussed it with interest and without understanding, because the county did not know about the codicil in the late Earl of Dunmore's will, and Lord Ashcroft had given no one any reason to guess. The magistrate arrived on a market day in October, when the street outside the conservatory was full of the noise and movement of the weekly market, and Dorothea had 2 girls in the teaching room working through a difficult passage in thirds. She heard the raised voice from the window. Not the ordinary noise of the market, but the specific carrying volume of a man making a public point. And she looked out to see a figure she recognized as Mr. Holt, a local magistrate who had been a close associate of the late Lord Ashcroft, standing on the pavement below and addressing the building with the formal indignation of a man who has been sent to do something unpleasant and has decided to perform it thoroughly. The substance of his complaint, delivered for the benefit of the market day crowd, was that the terms of Dorothea's building lease contained irregularities, that the property had been sublet without the knowledge of the primary leaseholder, that Lady Pembridge's occupation of the premises was legally questionable, and that the matter required immediate attention from the relevant parties. Dorothea's 2 pupils had stopped playing. She told them, without turning from the window, to continue the thirds passage from the beginning, and they did, and she watched from above. Crispin Ashcroft came around the corner from the direction of the inn. He was not hurrying, but he was walking with the particular directness of a man who knows where he is going and has decided on his approach before he arrives. He reached Mr. Holt in the middle of the street, and what followed was a conversation of perhaps 4 minutes. Dorothea could see the exchange, but not hear it above the market noise and the third's passage being worked through below her. And at the end of those 4 minutes, Mr. Holt said something brief, nodded once, and walked away. Crispin watched him go. Then he turned and looked up at the conservatory building. He did not come in. He stood on the pavement below for a moment, and Dorothea stood at the window above, and they looked at each other through the glass for the duration of 3 bars of the third's passage. And then Crispin turned and walked back in the direction of the inn. Dorothea returned to the teaching room. She corrected the girl on the left's fingering with the same attention she had given it before the interruption. And she said nothing about what she had seen. And she did not send word to the inn that evening, and she lay awake for some time that night, trying to determine what category of thing she had just witnessed, and failing to find one that satisfied her. She did not know yet that he had been writing to her solicitor for 3 weeks. Quiet, specific inquiries about the legal security of her lease, framed as the interest of a third party in the property's status, never identifying himself as the source. She did not know that Mr. Holt's appearance had not been coincidence, but had been arranged by someone with an interest in testing the lease's vulnerability, and that Crispin had known it was coming because he had been paying attention. She did not know any of this. What she knew was what she had seen from the window, and what she had seen was a man who had not come to the door afterward. And she was not sure whether that restraint was consideration or cowardice. And the uncertainty itself was the most unsettling thing about the entire afternoon. The letter from Crispin's solicitor arrived on a Thursday morning in late October, sealed with the Ashcroft crest and addressed in the formal hand of a man who has been asked to deliver something he understands the weight of. Inside was a folded document, the codicil itself, a dense page of legal language in the late Earl's solicitor's original hand, and a single line on a separate card, written by the current solicitor. The debt is cleared. Lord Ashcroft instructed this document be sent without comment. He said you deserve to understand what had occurred, even if it changes nothing. Dorothea read the card first. Then she unfolded the codicil and read it twice, slowly, with the attention she brought to any legal document. Parsing the clauses, identifying the mechanism, following the logic of the trap her father-in-law, who never was, had constructed with the particular vindictiveness of a man who had spent years planning a punishment for a son who had once defied him. The substance of it was this: if Crispin Ashcroft married, before settling a specific debt named in the codicil, a woman of independent financial means, a woman whose dowry or personal fortune exceeded a stated figure, the Dunmore estate would revert to a secondary heir, a distant cousin in Edinburgh who had no connection to the land and no interest in it beyond its sale value. The old Earl had known exactly what he was doing. He had built a cage around his son's future and timed the door to spring shut at the moment of happiness. Dorothea's dowry, the sum legally returned to her when the arrangement dissolved, exceeded the figure in the codicil by a considerable margin. She set the document down on the desk. She picked up the card and read the solicitor's line again. Even if it changes nothing. She set the card down beside the document. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk and her eyes on the middle distance. And then she stood, crossed to the recital room, sat down at the better piano, and began to play. She played for 40 minutes without stopping. She played through Schubert and then through a Clementi sonata she had learned at 17, and then through a set of variations she had not touched in a decade. And she played without reference to sheets or structure, her hands finding what they found, and the sound of it filled the recital room and probably reached the street. When she stopped, it was abrupt, not a conclusion, but a cessation, both hands lifting from the keys simultaneously. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Then she closed the lid over the keys, stood, and returned to the teaching room to finish the day's lessons. That evening, when the last pupil had gone, Mrs. Cavendish had stayed for tea as she did on Thursdays. Dorothea described the situation without naming her own position in it, framing it as a question about a woman of her acquaintance, in the way that women in 1842 framed questions they could not yet ask directly. "What is a woman owed?" Dorothea said, setting down her teacup with a precision that Mrs. Cavendish had learned to read as a sign of some interior pressure being managed. When a cruelty was chosen on her behalf, deliberately by a man who believed he was protecting her, but who never asked whether she wished to be protected in that particular way. Mrs. Cavendish considered this. She was not a woman who answered quickly when a question deserved thought. "She owes him nothing," she said finally. "The protection was not a gift if she didn't ask for it. You can't give someone something they didn't want and then call it sacrifice." "No," Dorothea said. "I agree with that." "But," Mrs. Cavendish said, in the tone of a woman who has not finished, "not owing something and not wanting something are two entirely different questions. And I notice you only asked me about the first one." Dorothea looked at her. She did not respond. She picked up her teacup again and drank. And Mrs. Cavendish looked at the fire and did not press her, because she had been Dorothea's friend long enough to know when a silence was a woman thinking and when it was a woman who had already thought and was not yet ready to say what she had concluded. 6 weeks after the codicil arrived, Dorothea was walking back from a lesson at the Harford house. A cold December afternoon, the ground hard with frost. The churchyard she passed through on the short route back to the conservatory empty and still. She was thinking about the Harford girl's wrist position and whether a different exercise might help. And she was not thinking about Crispin Ashcroft, which was how she came around the corner of the south transept and found him standing among the graves. He was not doing anything in particular. He was standing with his hat in his hands, looking at the church wall, in the attitude of a man who has been somewhere for a while and is not in a hurry to be anywhere else. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the frozen path. Neither of them moved for a moment. "I came to see what you had built," he said. "You have seen it?" she asked. "Yes, from the street. I did not go in." He paused. "It is considerable." "It is 14 girls," Dorothea said. "And a recital program for February?" He turned his hat in his hands once, a slow rotation. "Yes," he said. "I will leave if you ask me to." She looked at him. He was thinner than she remembered, or perhaps the winter light was less forgiving, and he was looking at her with the stillness she remembered from Dunmore Hall. Contained, deliberate, nothing performed. She noted that he had not brought an explanation. He had not arrived with a speech prepared. He had come to stand in a churchyard in December with his hat in his hands and say that he would go if she told him to. "I am not asking you to," she said. They walked one circuit of the churchyard without speaking. The frost on the grass crackled under their feet, and a bird moved somewhere in the yew tree at the east wall. And the town beyond the churchyard wall went about its market day business with the ordinary indifference of a place that does not know it is the backdrop for anything significant. When they reached the gate, Dorothea stopped. "Did you believe," she said, "that the cruelty was a form of kindness? Or did you simply not think of anything better?" He did not hesitate. "The second," he said. "I thought I was being efficient. I thought if I made it clean and fast, it would be easier for you than the truth, which would have required you to wait for a resolution that might not have come. I did not think about what I was doing to you. I thought about what I was protecting." He stopped. "I have not forgiven myself for that. That is not my work to do. Dorothea said. No, he agreed. It is not. She extended her hand. He took it, a formal handshake, the kind exchanged between equals who have reached the end of a conversation. But he held it a moment longer than the gesture required. Not dramatically, not with any declaration. Simply a moment more, his hand around hers in the cold air, before he released it. Good day, Lord Ashcroft, she said. Lady Pembridge, he said quietly. She walked back toward the conservatory. He returned to the inn. She did not look back, and she did not need to, because what had changed in that churchyard was not something that required confirmation. It was a small, specific thing, like a window unlatched, that had not been opened before. He came back twice in the following 3 weeks. Each time he arrived with a small, concrete errand that gave him a reason to be in Halesworth without giving him a reason to be at the conservatory door. The first time, a pedagogy book she had mentioned wanting, Czerny's Method, the newer edition, left with the innkeeper with a note in his hand that said only, I was told this might be useful. C.A. The second time, a word to the town council about the lane that Dorothea's pupils used on their way to the morning lesson, which had developed a rut deep enough to be a genuine hazard in wet weather, and which was repaired within a fortnight of his visit. He asked nothing. He sent no letters. He did not appear at the conservatory door, and he did not request a meeting. The county noticed his presence in Halesworth and processed it through the same machinery it applied to everything else. And Lady Hesterfield, who had been circulating a warm and precisely calibrated narrative about Dorothea's 9 months of dignified recovery, began instead to circulate a different narrative, one about consolation, and what a woman of a certain age might be willing to accept after disappointment, and whether the conservatory would survive the distraction of a renewed attachment. This narrative was worse than the first one. Dorothea heard it through Mrs. Cavendish, who delivered it with the flat, accurate fury of a woman who has no patience for cruelty, dressed as concern. Then the apothecary's daughter collapsed. She was 11 years old and one of Dorothea's best pupils. A serious girl with a gift for rhythm and the kind of focused attention that is rare at any age. And she was in the middle of a lesson on a Thursday afternoon when the color left her face and she fell forward against the piano keys with a discord that Dorothea would hear in her sleep for weeks afterward. The fever was on her within the hour, high and rapid, the kind that frightens everyone in a room who has seen what such fevers can do. Crispin had arrived in Halesworth that afternoon. He came through the conservatory door without announcement when he heard the sound from the street, the particular quality of alarm that carries through walls. And he was in the teaching room before Dorothea had time to register that he was there. He took the girl's other side without being asked, and between them they carried her to the back room where the couch was. And Dorothea sent the other pupils home while Crispin went for the doctor. And when the doctor came, he worked in the back room with Dorothea assisting and Crispin in the corridor outside. The corridor was cold. There was a single bench against the wall, and the lamp at the corridor's end gave just enough light to see by. Dorothea came out twice during the 2 hours the doctor worked. Once for more water, once to send a message to the apothecary's wife. And each time she passed the bench, Crispin was on it. Sitting upright, his coat still on against the cold, his hands on his knees. Waiting. When the fever broke, the doctor came out first, and then Dorothea, and she found Crispin still on the bench. She sat down beside him. The corridor was very quiet. After a moment, his hand moved from his knee to the bench between them and found hers and stayed there. Not a grip, not a declaration. Simply his hand over hers on the cold wood of the bench, and the warmth of it, and the steadiness of it, and the fact that he was still there. They remained like that until the doctor gathered his bag and came back through the corridor with his coat on, and then Crispin's hand moved back to his knee, and Dorothea stood to see the doctor out. When she came back, he was still on the bench. "She will be well?" he asked. The doctor believed so. The fever broke cleanly. Dorothea sat down again, at a slight distance this time. "Thank you for fetching him quickly." "It was nothing," he said. "It was not nothing," she said. "It was the right thing done fast, and that is not nothing." He said, "Dorothea," and then stopped. She waited. "I have not asked for forgiveness," he said. "I am not asking for it now. I want to be clear about what I am asking for." He paused, and she could see him selecting his words with the care of a man who has thought about this for 9 months and is still not certain he has found the right ones. "I am asking to be close enough to be useful, for as long as you permit it, without conditions on your side. I am not bargaining for a particular outcome." She studied him. She studied the line of his jaw and the steadiness of his hands on his knees, and the fact that he had waited 2 hours on a cold bench without complaint and without using the waiting as an argument for anything. "The winter program will need a named patron," she said. "The county assembly is in 3 weeks, and the conservatory needs the county's support, and a patron's name on the program would help considerably." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a folded paper, the draft program, which she had been carrying for a week, without knowing what she intended to do with it. She held it out to him. He took it. He unfolded it. He read it. And then something happened in his face that she had not seen before. Not relief, not triumph, but something quieter and more specific. The expression of a man who has been given a task he understands the weight of and intends to carry it properly. "I would be honored," he said. The night before the county assembly, he came to the conservatory at 7 in the evening, and he knocked, and she opened the door herself because Mrs. Cavendish had gone home, and the last pupil had left an hour ago. "I came only to ask whether you are well," he said, standing in the doorway. "I will not stay." She considered lying and decided against it. "I am not," she said. "I am not looking forward to tomorrow. I have spent 9 months building something real in this room, and tomorrow I have to walk into a hall full of people who have spent 9 months pitying me, and I have to ask them for their support, and I do not find that easy." He did not tell her it would be fine. He did not tell her she had nothing to fear. He looked at her steadily and said, "Whatever happens in that room tomorrow, whatever Lady Hesterfield says, whatever face the county puts on its concern, what you have built here is real. Those girls played scales in this room that they could not play 3 months ago. No assembly hall full of county opinion can reach that. It already happened." She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp on the piano threw warm light across the room, and the conservatory smelled of rosin and old wood and the tea she had drunk an hour ago. And Crispin Ashcroft was standing in her doorway with his hat in his hand, telling her the truth without decoration. She stepped forward and kissed him once, her decision entirely made in the moment it was made without premeditation. His mouth was warm and he went very still, and after a moment she stepped back. "Thank you," she said, "for the journey and the lane and tonight." He looked at her. "Good night, Lady Pembridge," he said. His voice was entirely steady. He walked back down the street toward the inn, and she closed the door, and she stood alone in the conservatory for a while with her hands at her sides, and she was not afraid of tomorrow anymore. The winter assembly of the county was held in a hall that had hosted 100 such occasions. Its proportions designed for display, its candlelight arranged for effect, its acoustics suited to the kind of speeches that are meant to be heard by everyone in the room. including the person they are aimed at. Dorothea entered on Mrs. Cavendish's arm, in a dark blue dress she had owned before Dunmore Hall and had not worn since. And the room turned toward her with the collective attention of a body that has been waiting for this particular entrance for 9 months. She walked to her seat with the account book face firmly in place, and she sat and she looked at the room with the expression of a woman who has made a decision about where she is and intends to be entirely present in it. Lady Hesterfield rose to speak midway through the formal portion of the evening. She was a tall woman of 60, with the particular authority of someone who has never been seriously opposed. And she spoke with the warmth of a woman who believes she is performing a kindness and has not examined the belief. "We are so pleased," Lady Hesterfield said, addressing the room with a smile that included Dorothea in its sweep, "to welcome Lady Pembridge to this assembly, her first appearance among us in some months, and a testament, I think we can all agree, to the remarkable courage it takes to find purpose and direction after disappointment. The conservatory she has established in Halesworth speaks to a fortitude that we all admire deeply. And I know I speak for the county when I say how warmly we have followed her progress and how sincerely we wish her continued." Dorothea began to rise. Crispin was already on his feet. He stood at the edge of the room, near the wall, where he had been since the assembly began. Not at the front, not positioned for performance, simply present, as he had been present in the churchyard and the corridor and the conservatory doorway. He was looking at Lady Hesterfield, and then he turned and looked at the room. And when he spoke, his voice was entirely quiet and entirely clear. "Lady Pembridge was not disappointed," he said. The room went still. "She left Dunmore Hall 9 months ago because I said something to her that I had no right to say, and that I cannot justify, even now, that the reason for it is understood," he continued. "The reason exists. It is a legal matter, now resolved, and it explains why I did what I did. But it does not excuse it, because I chose cruelty when I could have chosen trust, and she bore the consequence of that choice alone, in public, for 9 months, with a dignity that I did not deserve." He paused. "She left my house with more grace than I had given her reason to expect. And she came to Halesworth and built something that is not a consolation and is not a retreat. It is a conservatory with 14 pupils and a February recital and a named patron. And it exceeds, in every particular that matters, anything I could have offered her at Dunmore Hall." He turned. He looked directly at Dorothea, in front of every witness in the room, and his voice did not change its register. No performance, no sentiment, simply the flat and complete honesty of a man who has rehearsed the truth rather than the speech. "I have loved you since the 3rd sentence you spoke to me," he said. "I have spent 9 months earning the right to say that in public, and I am saying it now." The room did not move. Dorothea sat for 3 full seconds in her chair, and the room sat with her. And the quiet that followed was the kind that a room produces when something real has just been said in it, and no one is quite ready to respond. Then she stood. She turned first to Lady Hesterfield, who was still at the front of the room with an expression that had passed through surprise and arrived at something more carefully composed. "I thank the county for 9 months of concern," Dorothea said. "It has been genuine, I believe, and I have not been ungrateful for it. But I find I will not be requiring it further." She let that settle for a moment, and then she turned. She looked at Crispin across the room, and she thought about the corridor at Dunmore Hall, and the churchyard in the frost, and the cold bench, and the hand that had stayed without asking anything. And she thought about the churney on the innkeeper's desk, and the lane that had been repaired, and the doorway last night, and the truth that had been given to her without decoration. "I will have you," she said, "on one condition." The room, which had not been breathing, continued not to breathe. "That you never again decide what I need without asking me," she said. "Not once. Not for my protection, not for any reason. You ask, I answer. That is the arrangement." He looked at her across the room and said, "Yes, without qualification, before everyone present." He said it in the same tone he had used for everything else. Quiet, direct, entirely serious. The room exhaled. Someone near the back began to applaud, and then more joined, and the sound built into something genuine. And Mrs. Cavendish, who had been sitting beside Dorothea's empty chair with an expression of profound satisfaction, rose to her feet and turned to face the room. "The conservatory's winter program," Mrs. Cavendish said, raising her voice to Carrie, "will be distributed at the door. I will read the list of patrons." She produced the folded program from her bag, with the efficiency of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment. Lord Ashcroft of Dunmore, first among the patrons. She read the rest of the list, with the unhurried clarity of a woman who knows the list is secondary to the first name. Lady Hesterfield did not applaud. She sat very upright in her chair and wore the expression of a woman revising her understanding of a situation she believed she had controlled. And she did not applaud. And it did not matter at all. The conservatory the following morning was lit by a single lamp that had been left burning through the night. The last lamp, the one beside the better piano, throwing its warm light over the open keyboard and the music stand where a new sheet of Schubert had been placed, carefully, by a hand that was not Dorothea's. The lamp had been left by someone who knew she would come in early. On the piano bench, 2 cups of tea sat in the cold morning air, still faintly warm. Beside them, folded once, a note in Crispin's hand. "The fingering you described for the left hand in the second movement. I believe the 4th finger on the D flat is what you were looking for. Try it before the girls arrive." From the next room, small feet moved across the floorboards. And then there was the sound of a piano bench being adjusted. And then a girl's hands found the keys, and she began to play. A scale. C major, 1 octave, both hands together. She reached the top, turned, and came back down. Unbroken, clean, every note in its place. She reached the bottom and stopped. And then she started again, from the beginning. Because she had done it once, and now she wanted to do it again, and again after that, because that is what it feels like when a thing that was difficult becomes, for the first time, possible.